Alright, so in this video, I want to share with you some of my favorite chord progressions, and the way we'll do it is like I'll explain like one chord progressions, you'll see what I mean in a second, two chord progressions, some three chord progressions I like, and then a couple of four chord progressions, and I think that will be a pretty like robust explanation of how I view them, and then like why they're my favorites, and then like actually just explicitly show you how to build them. And so in terms of theory, this is going to be based mostly around like dark sounding stuff. More so what I mean from a theory perspective is like minor melodies and stuff like that. So it'll be based mostly around the natural minor, but we'll also use the harmonic minor scale and the minor pentatonic scale as well. This will cover like various styles of my production. So of course, like dark trap, like hard trap in general, but then there's also dark pop and there's also dark R&B along with that dark hip hop as well. So I'll include some examples below, and Kofi will toss up some screenshots of the beats I'm talking about. But my beat Fenty from a few years ago is a really good example of like the dark pop that this allows me to do. One of my more recent beats called Until the End, which is like a Travis Scott x Drake type beat, is a really good example of like the dark R&B. And then one of my really recent type beats, which is doing well in like sales and stuff, Moody Gardens, and even Candyman is a good example of this too, is a really good demonstration of like dark trap and how like I use these melodic concepts in order to build those. All of those beats were melodies that I made from scratch, completely made from scratch right here on my computer. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll have like a very clear and concise explanation for, again, why I use these chord progressions, how to build them, and then how to leverage them in your own production style without just like explicitly copying me. So the first thing I want to show you are like my one chord progressions. This is kind of based around a little bit of the melody stuff we've been talking about lately. It'll be probably a couple more videos would have come out since the last melody videos, but I did the guitar melody with Flex, and that was basically just this one chord concept that I'm talking about. That's it. That's like the one chord progression, and then you could literally duplicate it over. And like a lot of my melodies, like Candyman, for example, is basically just these three notes. But something that is interesting about this like minor chord fundamentally is like musical dissonance and like tension and half steps and stuff like that. We've all talked it to death in trap production at this point, but specifically for this one minor chord, understanding that concept allows you to make chord progressions that have multiple different chords, but you're kind of still just using the one minor chord. So if I could just kind of show you what I mean, there's a bunch of different like permutations of this. So let's cut this and I'll show you like some different ones that I kind of know, and then we'll talk through it. Boom. That's the first one. Here's another one. Here's another one. Here's like, let's see if we could do one more. That's one. And then this is more of like a permutation of the 6, which we'll get into in a little bit, but like even that kind of is like working off of those suspended notes in that one chord. So basically those suspended notes are basically when you use the concept of dissonance and half steps, sometimes it could be a whole step, to basically make your melody sound more interesting by using those concepts. So in this one, which is the first permutation, it's literally just moving that 3 in that triad down to the 2. But then this one is really interesting too, because what we're doing is we're suspending that 3 to the 2, and then we're suspending that 5 to the 4 as well. So suspended 2, suspended 4. And then this one is suspended 4, but not a suspended 2. This one is like a 6 with a suspended 4, suspended 2, and then a 6 at the bottom for the root note. And so all of that is working off of that C minor chord. And so that's kind of how I'll put together chord progressions that have multiple chords without using any more chords than basically just that one minor chord. So if we could just get rid of all this. You know, I added kind of like a fill chord at the end. If you got rid of all this, right, and we just rock with just this, right, That's basically just one chord. To me, it's one chord, and that's how I put together those one chord melodies. And then from there, we've seen it before, right? You take this, you create motif, you play with the notes, and you make it more interesting off of that. But as we've said, especially with acoustic instruments, straight chords can sound amazing. I recommend taking advantage of straight chords along with motif development, along with arpeggiation, chord voicing, borrowed chords, a lot of that stuff we've been talking about in the previous melody tutorials. So definitely check those out as well, because I've been dropping gems. The 14 drum kit has a bunch of sounds for my placements and TV syncs too. Now I'm not entirely sure why you don't have it yet, because it's free, and besides that, it's lifetime updates, and those are 100% free too. And you get access to my 14 letter where I send you free gems on how to actually make money with your beats by being a valuable producer. So here's a nice list of a bunch of other perks you'll get so that we can just get back to the cook up. If you're interested in the sauce, peep the link in the description below. Okay, so for this next one, we're still going to be using that fundamental minor chord, but then we're going to be building off of a concept we talked about the other day. I finally remembered what the other video was. It was the one where we were talking about how you need major chords in order to make more interesting minor chords. So we're going to be revisiting that a little bit today, but then we're also going to be talking about how we can add minor chords to more minor chords to make interesting melodies as well. So getting into these two chord progressions that I really like, and we'll go ahead and start clicking in a new melody. I'm working on a new kit that's going to have 100 presets of like mostly stock mixing stuff, because I've been getting into mixing with stock. So I've got some chains going. This is not stock, but like the melody chain is like what's making it really loud, and that's all stock and stuff. I'm really excited about that. Be on the lookout, email list, Discord, blah, blah, blah. And as we talked about in that video where we were talking about how you need major chords to make more interesting dark melodies, if we duplicate this over and literally just move that note up, we get a 6th chord, and that's our 2 chord progression. And that is actually a major chord. It's just transposed. So if we do that, then that's a major chord. Good stuff. Then we could transpose it down and it could sound like this instead. There's a lot of different ways that the transposing of it and the voicing of it and turning it into a borrowed chord, basically. Check out those other melody guides. Really useful stuff if you don't know what I'm talking about. But depending on how you voice the chords, it turns it into borrowed chords, which can then create even more interesting melodies. So you have the potential to really get creative with the way you color these very simple chord progressions. So I think the progression that we actually had going on was something like this. Right, we had the one basically hitting for 3 chords, and then we would resolve with the 6 and then have that just repeat over and over again. But I've noticed the 6 is a really good resolving chord. It works out well starting at the beginning, and we'll talk about that in a second when we talk about 3 chord progressions. Resolving with the 5, which is the next chord that we're about to talk about that we can add to this fundamental minor chord to make it more interesting, is a good way too. But that's one that I like to do more so where it'll be 1 5 1 5, you know what I'm saying, as opposed to using the 5 as resolution. But it makes for good resolution as well. So getting into building that 5, basically all we do is we could, I'm not going to get into the music theory, but I'll link below the full, you know, melody guide again. It's like 1 hour and 15 minutes of me just like trying to beat into your head how important music theory is. And so all we're going to do is we're literally just going to move it until that root note that used to be on C is now matched up with the 5 of this fundamentally built triad in C minor. So here's what it sounds like. Now, you won't normally hear that. You'll hear it in a lot of dark trap. Travis Scott makes really good use of this chord progression as well, along with that other, like, you know, the Travis Scott chord progression. This is another one he makes really good use of, his producers. Here's probably more so how you'll hear it transposed down and voiced. That is so nice. And again, it is so simple to do, and you can build amazing motifs off of this. Just arpeggiating this with a really dope sound sounds incredible. And let's just go ahead and do it real quick. Even switch the sound. Like, that just sounds so dope, bro. So I mean, like, it's just once you understand how notes relate to each other, like a lot of the struggle with melody goes away. Notation, difficult. I get it. A lot of people weren't band geeks like I was. So the alternative really is just thinking in patterns, like I said. If it ever gets too difficult, right? Duplicate it over, boom, there's your 5. Transpose. Like, you never have to overthink it because it's math. It will work every time. So for 3 chord progressions, pretty much all we're doing is using chords we've talked about and then going over ways that I combine them to make chord progressions I actually like. The first one I want to talk to you about is basically just the 1-6, but then we're adding a chord we haven't explicitly talked about yet. It's going to be the 7 of that minor natural, and you'll see how it works in a second. So let's get into playing that. Ignoring some of these bass notes for a second, so let's mute them so you know which ones are bass notes. This is just the fundamental minor chord, which we call it the 1 because we're saying we're in the key of C, and that's like the root note, if that makes sense. So we would call it the 1 minor, but C minor in a different scale could be like the 4, for example, or the 5, you know what I'm saying? So it depends on what key. So take 1 minor with a grain of salt, which is why I tend to say fundamental minor chords sometimes. But if you hear me say 1 minor, that's all that I really mean. So we've got this 1 minor in C minor, and then we've got the 6, which is a major chord, and then this is literally just the 7. That's literally it. That's how you build the 7. Actually, technically, this is the 7 from the minor harmonic. We won't get into why it's different. Check out the melody guide down below. It's an hour of me talking about it. Good stuff. But that's basically it, and this is how you can build it if you wanted to do it. So it's just that 6. If we wanted to even get rid of this, let's play it one more time and listen really quickly. Hard. I love this. It's just got that smooth, like, kind of Latin vibe. I don't know, maybe I'm tripping. I love this chord progression. If you literally just want to click it in, right, bro? And I'll change the key so that you can really see what it's just patterns, right? That's D minor, root notes D. That's the 1 minor for D minor scale, right? Duplicate it over, we've got the 6 in D minor, right? Then I know that in the natural minor or harmonic minor, right, that 7 is right under the 1 like that. And so I know that to build that harmonic minor 7, it's a little bit different, and it uses dissonance and musical tension a little bit. So check out the video down below. Boom, you skip 2 spaces, go to that 3rd one, then you skip 2 spaces again, go to that third space again, and that's how you build that 7 for this specific chord progression that I like to build. And there you go, there it is again. In D, in the key of D minor harmonic. And so the other one I want to talk about has all chords that we've already talked about before. And so we're going to be using the 6 from the natural minor, the 5 from the natural minor, and then the 1 from the natural minor. So there's a lot of ways you could go about building this, considering the pattern concept we've talked about so far. So let's just see. This is the 1 in C minor so far. It's just a fundamental C minor chord. But if we wanted to say C minor is our 1, okay, we know we're starting with a 6, boom. Then we know this is going to be a 5, so let's move that to G for the root note, which would be the 5, and then we can voice this down. And then boom, there's our 1, which is already there. And that's our chord progression built. We could even just duplicate that over for fill. Here, I'm African, I'm Nigerian. So a lot of people think I'm from South Africa. I'm not. I'm West African actually, but I'm finna move to South Africa for real. This has got this really nice like descending kind of feel to it. I used to hear it so much in like Afrobeat songs that I liked. I'd go to parties with my parents, and this chord progression was just like, it had niggas in a chokehold for real. It's so good. It's so good. So with that being said, I want to share a couple of 4 chord progressions that I really like. For this, we are going to be finessing and finagling the first one. So basically, we already did this. It's just gonna be the 1, the 6, and then the 7. But as we talked about, that 1 can be a bunch of different chords. So this is where it gets cool, because you can pepper in a bunch of different concepts and different types of chord progressions to really start doing interesting things. And so I think I might have heard Metro Boomin do this like maybe once, right? But to be honest, I don't hear people do this chord progression like this a lot. 1, suspend it, then 6, and then that 7, And that she's just so dope. Cause it almost seems like you're finna go 2 chord progression that first time. And then it just gets like super like melodic in the second like part of the chord progression. So I really like using that when I want to do something that's like in my dark trap style, but a little bit more emotional. There's a lot of different ways I'll sauce up my favorite chord progressions that are like 1 or 2 chords, especially into 4 chord progressions. And we can talk about that another day, like extending chord progressions. So this is kind of built off of that. There's a lot of different flex spots for this, so I'll probably have to make a video for that. But again, this is just one way I kind of take that style and make it more emotional. The important thing to kind of make a note of is that like it's like when you're writing an essay, right? Or like my newsletters, for example, just filling it with big words doesn't help anybody, right? Like I have to make sure like the words I do use communicate like well, which is why you'll hear people say like write at a 5th grade level if you want your writing to like connect with people, because like you've got to communicate with people without being like super complicated. So where it makes sense, be complicated, use a lot of chords in your progression, use big words in your writing, but like you gotta really think about like what you actually want to accomplish. So like if you're working for an album, if I was working on an album, most of the album would not be 4 chord progressions and stuff like that. It probably, because that would get exhausting, I believe, for my listener from an emotional point of view, like for what they're consuming. Basically, maybe from someone else they'd want that, but like for me personally, for my style, like I don't want to fatigue my listener. Me personally, I get fatigued by stuff like that unless I'm in the mood for it. So it's just like one way to think about it. But getting into the last 4 chord progression that I love, I actually don't play this one too well just off the cuff, but I had it in the March Madness kit, which is free, by the way, link in the description below. So let's see if I actually put it in there, right? It was in chord progression outliners. This is such a fire kit, by the way. It helps me make like melodies all the time. So I'll just drag this in and we'll extend this over 8 bars. I think it'll really slap if we extend it. That shit is so hard, bro. So like I kind of developed this by understanding that the 4-5-3 is like a really good R&B progression for me. I talk a lot about how like R&B is technically my favorite style to produce in, and I made a short that went like viral talking about this chord progression without realizing that if you resolve it with another chord, so in this case the 6, it makes for this kind of like almost poppy kind of anime vibe to it. So it's happy, but it's got this kind of like, not ominous, because that just kind of means scary, not sad either, but just in a way that it's like deep, right? And that's, I don't really know how to talk about it because like emotion, like they're just words at the end of the day. Words don't do a good job, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. The more chords you do use, the more potential you have to like communicate more emotion, to the point where like, to me, this communicates an emotion that I can't actually even put into words. So if you do know a word that describes the emotion of this kind of like anime pop vibe, let me know in the description below, because I am at a loss for words. And so the reason I'm not even bothering to get into telling you how to build it is because fundamentally at the end of the day, that don't really matter. For one, because if you just could copy this MIDI, for example, and just keep it in your file library, for example, you would have access to this exact chord progression. And that's the thing, chord progressions get used over and over again, right? Like the 1 chord progression, for example, how ridiculous would it be if you had to change up the 1 chord every time? That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take the basic mathematical concepts, because that's really what they are, and then use that to make something interesting in your music. You're never trying to reinvent the music theory that Pythagoras created like 3,000 years ago, like, which is why I wanted to show it to you, so you can take it, use it in your own production, and start practicing it and get familiar with it. Find the ones you like, keep them, get rid of all the ones you don't like. You know what I'm saying? So I hope this was helpful. I appreciate you for watching. Thank you for attention. Shout out to Dope, the members of my label. I appreciate each and every one of you for being a supporter. Check out the first link in the description below if you want to learn more about how to join and the amazing perks you get for being a part of it. I'm gone. Peace.